It is the top of the hour, 1 o'clock Central Time, 11 Pacific, and we'll begin right now. Presentation here. My name is Kyle Niebel, and welcome to this month's consulting webinar presented to you by CDI. And I'll be your host today for the webinar, where we will be designing a scanning session, or several scanning sessions, in Laserfiche Quick Fields. This will be designed to show you how to set up barcode reading or zone OCR reading within Quick Fields. This will be a build along as well, and the question is, what is that? Well, it's an interactive experience designed to guide the viewer through creation and deployment of a common business process. We do these quite often, and today's build along, we will show you the process of building a Quick Fields session and using barcode and or zone OCR if you have either of those. So that'd be great for you to learn. If you have questions during the webinar, please post them to the chat questions box. I will take some time at the end of the webinar to go through and answer as many as possible. So for today, some tips for success. Take good notes and don't be afraid to ask questions. I will try and go as slow as time allows. We do have 2 sessions we are going to build here, and there is a certain limit to how fast or slow we can go. We're always looking for recommendations for new topics and how we can improve ourselves. So at the end of this session, please complete the survey at the end. Lastly, remember this will be recorded and it will be accessible from our CDI YouTube channel within a day or 2. So again, just repeating ourselves here, take screenshots or notes, ask questions in the chat window, and at the end of the session and when you disconnect, please complete that survey and let us know how we're doing. We do appreciate that. And that recording will be posted in the next few days as soon as we can get it up there on our CDI YouTube channel. If you've not visited that channel, you'll find quite a lot of videos that are very helpful. If you've ever been there, you'll see it's a pretty fun site. We enjoy putting those up there. All right, so today's demonstration and build along will cover barcode and zone OCR within Quick Fields. We'll keep it simple. And the intended audience for this webinar is Quick Fields operators and Laserfiche administrators. So do you have to be advanced? Not necessarily. I would say if you're a beginner, this might be a bit quick, but I think you'll pick it up. Intermediate should have no problem and above. The requirements to do this, at least what I'm going to demonstrate here today, would include the Quick Fields with a Zone OCR add-on, or the Quick Fields with Barcode add-on. Those do not come out of the basic Quick Fields. They are add-ons that you can purchase. They do come with certain license packs, so you'll need to double check if you have that. What will you need to accomplish this? Well, you'll obviously have to have a Laserfiche repository in which you will store these documents that are being processed through Quick Fields. You'll need Laserfiche Quick Fields. And for creating the cover sheets that I'm going to use here in the demonstration, Microsoft Word, you'll also need, if you're going to do a database lookup, some kind of data source, like a Microsoft SQL server or an Excel file. In my case here today, we will demonstrate using a lookup into Microsoft SQL for some information. So our agenda here is to show you a demonstration of what is already built and show you what the end result of building some of these Quick Field sessions will end up looking like. We'll then step through how you set up those sessions in order to get the same results that I just demonstrated. And we'll then, in the process of setting it up and doing the build along, show you exactly all the steps that I took to get there. So that being said, I'm sure you are all waiting to see the demonstration. So why don't we go ahead and do that right away. All right. So we have Laserfiche Quick Fields up here on screen. I'll maximize that. And I've got a session here built, and it's going to read, at least in this one session, it's going to read barcoded cover sheets. So the way you generate cover sheets can be done in several different ways. You might have a actual third-party application that can create these cover sheets based on data that you have. Maybe it's reading an Excel file or a database in Microsoft SQL server. In my case, I actually just took and built 3 pages very simply in Microsoft Word and typed in the information myself and created a barcode. So how do you do that? Well, sometimes we can do some simple things. I'll bring over my Microsoft Word here. And in my case, I created a simple sheet, put in a number here. In this case, this is going to represent our vendor numbers because we're going to do some lookups against a vendor database. But if you're creating barcodes, you could actually do that with a barcode font that you can find on the internet for free. One of them, which I chose, was the Libra barcode font that is from Google. It is a free open font, and it works with Microsoft Office. So that font, when you apply it to your document, will put a barcode instead of a regular text font. Now, when you are using barcodes, you do need to put a asterisk at the beginning or the end of the actual information so that the barcode will work. Okay, so that's kind of an interesting concept, but if you don't have that in there, it may not read the barcode. In fact, it won't read the barcode. So that's why I put that in there. So they're without the barcode font, and they're with the barcode font. Now, Laserfiche has no way of creating cover sheets from within Laserfiche itself. There's just no mechanism for that. So I recommend maybe doing a mail merge with an Excel file and Microsoft Word to generate your cover sheets if you have unique numbers that you need to have on there. A separator sheet here, or what they call a cover sheet, maybe it's generic and the information is on the document itself. Maybe there's a barcode or a certain number in an area on that document that you can pull the information off of. But at least your cover sheet could be used to say, hey, this is the next document. And maybe you just have the same number in the barcode and it just says, hey, if there's a barcode, I've got a cover sheet here. So that's how we might start that. So that's the setup. With the quick field session in place and ready to go, I have designated in my case, I'm using quick field's ability to pull from a file system, and I'm just pulling from a folder called QF test and within that system. So within that folder, it has a batch file, TIFF image, and it has 3 documents. And in that batch file, each document has a unique ID. And what I have set up is a little database that has some information as well. We've got 3 vendors. We can see this vendor ID column, some vendor name, and other information like the address, city, state, zip, etc. So that's your database. So we'll do a lookup as well as just identifying documents, breaking them apart, and then storing them in the repository. So why don't we go ahead and run this. This is our quick demonstration to show you that with it set up, here's what we're going to build. So we'll just run our scan, pretend you've got paper in the scanner. This could be done the same way, just change your source. Instead of being a search directory, it would actually be a scanner. Put those pages in the scanner and go ahead and hit the Start Scanning button. I currently have it set up so that it will not store the documents automatically, and we can see that the results here in the document revision pane are going to show us all 3 documents. There was 6 pages, and it split them into each page. Now I could have actually added a step where it dropped the first page after identifying the info, but I left the cover sheet on there in this case. So we have our cover sheet here, and if you look over on the right hand side, if you see that, it has actually pulled information from that database with the vendor ID number and then the vendor name, address, city, state, and zip. In fact, if we look at the document name, we've also got the vendor name at the top there. Depends on which one it is. 1001 is Cities Digital. There you go. So it's pulled that info and also applied that information to the template all at the same time based on the lookup, which was based on just the vendor ID. And we can store the documents into the repository. In this case, I have set it up to store the documents into a QuickFields webinar folder based on vendor name, and that vendor name is a token. So each vendor name will have a folder, and in fact, if we go look at the repository, we have our QuickFields webinar folder. Nothing's in there at the moment, so upon storage, when we store those documents, they go into the repository, and each folder was created for the vendor, and the document was inserted in there. So that's the end result. So looks really fast, easy to use, and for your QuickFields operators, it should be that simple. So the question is, how did we get there? Now I do have another session that I called our Zone OCR session, and it works almost the same way. And do I need to save the session? I can say yes. In this case, it's all set up and I can run it again. And I could say no, but I'll say yes here. It'll reload. And this session will look pretty similar, except instead of using barcode, it will use a Zone OCR process. What's a Zone OCR? Let me go ahead and delete that. I was doing some testing there. Zone OCR is the ability to read words on the page and process documents as we see there. And if we run this one, we'll see that it creates a very similar setup, different document pages, same page count, and the same naming convention. I pretty much copied this session and switched out barcode for Zone OCR. And it's just reading the text on the page on those cover sheets to pull the information across. And as you can see on the right-hand side, the template was filled out initially as well. All right, so with that said, how did we build all that out in QuickFields? Why don't we go ahead and build a new session. We can do File, New, Blank Session, and or you could build using a session wizard as well. There is a quick, in fact, there's even a wizard when you choose Blank Session. So this is going to begin our build out. And so I will try and go as slow as time allows. We have about 45 minutes left, so we should be able to do each of these sessions in about 20 minutes or less. It may actually take less time, but we'll go through it here step by step. And again, please post any questions in the chat window, and I'll be happy to answer those questions at the end. All right. Next up is our blank session. So we'll go ahead and start, and you can call the session anything you want. I'll say yes on that one. And initially, we'll just title it New Session. You know what, I'm just gonna go ahead and do that again, and I'm gonna use a session wizard. That one is really nice. So using a session wizard kind of helps you get some basic info set up on the QuickFields session. We'll call this barcode, for lack of a better term. And you have wizard types to choose from. If you've never used QuickFields before, maybe you'll want to step through the full wizard. However, the quick wizard or standard wizard is usually good enough. And if you're an expert at QuickFields, you might even start without the wizard or just use the quick wizard. There's not much that we need here on this session, so why don't we start with quick wizard. Go ahead and do that. We will tell it where we're going to pull our document from. If you're pulling from a scanner, it's usually going to be a choice of Twain or WIA, Windows Image Acquisition Scan Engine, or Twain, which is probably the most common way of scanning. In my case, I'm pulling from a scan source on my file system folder on my desktop. And so I would choose Universal Capture, but you can do that. And finally, there is Laserfiche Capture Engine. You can pull documents from Laserfiche. Maybe you've got a scanned batch sitting in a special folder for QuickFields, and then QuickFields can pull that file out of Laserfiche and process that file as if it had been scanned. All right, so in this case, I'll set mine up in this way. The next question is, where are the documents going to be sent? And so we'll want to make sure that you choose your server name and repository, and also set up the authentication as to what account will be used to log into Laserfiche and store the documents. In my case, I'm going to use my Windows account, but you can use any account you see fit. You might even feel like you need to create a QF account or QuickFields account with a full license that might be used only to store documents. If you don't have enough licenses, it'd be better to use somebody's Windows account, or maybe create a account that's not licensed but is titled QuickFields, and hopefully it doesn't have any contention issues with other non-licensed accounts. But go ahead and set that up. We'll use Windows Authentication. Validate that that login will work with that repository. Notice it says success down there. We're good to go. And that's the Quick Wizard, and we'll hit finish. So at least QuickFields knows where to send the documents. All right. Now, your session name is up in the top left corner. Your pre-classification processing might be here if you need that, but we don't normally need to do that unless you want to clean up your images. If you're getting good, clean images, there's no point in doing that. However, you could add some tasks like despeckle, deskew, and maybe a few other like line removal, maybe resize and or rotate to fix the images before they get processed and permanently stored. And any pre-classification processing that you do add here will be permanent on those images, whereas sometimes you might have temporary enhancements in these other steps down below within the document classification itself. All right, so we'll skip that for now as far as pre-classification processing goes. The next step is you could rename your document class. For example, name it anything you want. We'll call this one vendor files, for lack of a better term, and dash barcode, but you can call it anything you want. And what we want to do is from that batch file, which will have cover sheets and document pages in it, and every cover page, at that cover page, we want to separate out that document and create a new document. We need to do page identification. Now, if you've never seen QuickFields, you might be wondering, well, don't we always just identify by the first page? That would be very common, but you could also do identification on the last page. Sometimes documents actually don't have anything on the first or any other pages except on the last page, which says, oh, this is a unique document, and it's the only way to tell because it's on the last page. But more commonly, you'll find first page identification. Now, in our case, we want to use a barcode to determine if it is the next document. And the way we do that is we will, one, make sure that we have a sample image from the page that would look like that it has the barcode, which you saw previously. Out of the box, Laserfiche has one sample image. We do need to make sure that we can add additional sample images, so you can create a new image by either scanning that image through your scanner. So you take that one cover sheet and throw it in the scanner and scan that image. You can also import a sample image, or you can import text. In my case, I'm going to import a sample image, and I'll go ahead and open up and choose the cover sheet I have created. You can pretend you scanned it, and now you have that sample cover sheet. The next step I do within our cover sheet is once I've added it, I actually go into configuration and I move it. Notice there's this little grid icon, a bunch of dots there on the far left. of the name of the icon. One, I'll make it a default, and two, I'll move it to the top so that this always appears as my default sample image from now on in any of the other areas that I might go into within the configurations for page identification and page processing. Okay, and technically you could even delete page 1 if you were so inclined. That sample image that Laserfiche drops in there, you don't need to keep it if you don't need it because it's not your sample image, it's just a placeholder. Your sample image would be the one that you scanned in or you imported from a TIFF image. All right, we'll click OK and make sure that that's set up. So now that is set in there, and I want to add the barcode identification. So in the first page, any page I throw in there, I want to make sure that it reads the barcode and says, oh, hey, this is a next document because there's a barcode here. And if you've installed the barcode module, you will see over in the far right side, under the list of processes, the barcode module. Go ahead and click on the barcode module, and it adds it over here on the right side. Now there is a wizard that you can step through to set up the barcode. So down below at the bottom right corner is the region selection. So go ahead and step through that. And then we're going to look for a barcode, and we're going to click on the add button. And you can call this barcode 1. I might even call it barcode ID zone. And what we'll do is we'll click and drag. Once we've changed the name over here on our zone, we could click and drag that zone over here and expand it a little bit to make sure that if we see a barcode in this zone, we're good to go. Okay, so that's in there. You could set it for the whole page or just a small area within the page. All right, so that's added that. Now notice there is an add button over here in the top right corner. You could have multiple barcodes. Maybe you have barcodes on some pages where there's one, but the first page actually has 2 barcodes. You could say, well, I need to have both barcodes to identify this as the first page of my document, because everything else might have one barcode in that same area, but there's a slightly different barcode somewhere else. Or you can just target it to wherever that barcode is on that single document. All right, so that is that. The next button is our condition of the barcode. So what's our condition? So we'll go up to the top here and click into the box. And we want to tell the system, hey, quick fields, if the barcode ID zone is not empty or contains a number or starts with a letter, it could be anything like that. In my case, I think I'll say is not empty. Okay, so that way the barcode, as long as there's a barcode there and there's something in the barcode to be read, we're good to go. And then we'll just click OK. And then down below the barcode type, you can choose one of several different barcode types. And you know, these free barcodes out there, you could get different ones. Your software that you might be using, if you have a special software that's generating your cover sheets for you, you could do QR codes or any of the other barcodes out there, 2D or 3D, not 2D, sorry, or 1D. This one is code 3 of 9. They call it code 3.9 as it, but there's code 3 of 9. That's the code I'm using, and that's what this free Libra font is. So that's why I'm using that barcode. You can tell it to look for all the barcode values in there, but code 12 of 8, Codabar, or code 1 of 28, I'm not sure which one that is, Codabar, and some others. So there is our barcode type. The direction, you can tell it to read horizontal. If the barcode was oriented vertically, you could tell it to orient itself vertically. There's a little hint there. When you roll your cursor over that, easy enough to make that choice. And then the default is a minimum length of 4, but if you're expecting shorter information, like maybe 2 characters or whatnot, you might want to change that down or change it up or customize your font, the character length. All right, and then you could use a checksum. If a checksum exists and I don't normally use this. In some cases you might need to do that, but it's not necessary. We do want to convert to human readable characters. So once it reads the barcode, it should tell us that, oh, that's 1001 or whatever that number is. And finally, at the bottom, I'll click Finish at our step 8, and now we have everything configured in one property for our identification. In fact, you can even right-click on the barcode and test the process. And down below in the output box, as we can see down here, go ahead and test that process, see if it reads it. And we did get a number. We've got the barcode type. It tells us the type of barcode and the number that it read there, 1001. So we know it's working. Excellent. So now we can run our pages through and identify the first page of every document. But now we still have to configure what it's going to read off of that document. And in our demo, we were reading the ID number that's a barcode. So we're going to add the barcode in there again. And again, come over to the right side, click on barcode. And at this point, you can just click on and notice it renames it barcode 2 because it doesn't like to have the same name in the same quick field session. And that barcode 2, if I click away and come back, notice the properties are all over here on the right side. Some are configured and some are not. And in fact, it's slightly different on this page processing because we need to tell it what to process from the document as it's being identified. And we're going to read page 1, and we're going to look for the barcoded vendor number. So I'll change the name on that region itself. And then we'll want to make sure that we configure where that region is reading. Go ahead and set that up. You could, I mean, if it's trying to read a barcode, you could even cover anything in there because it's only going to read a barcode, even though you have text below it. But we'll leave it right there. And it's going to read code 3 of 9, and all the defaults are in there. So that's going to be our barcode number to read that value off there. Now, I also had another step in our demo where it looked up information from a database and applied it to our documents. And before we even get into that, let's go back up to our document type, and let's configure some items that we had not configured previously. What we'll do over on the right side, you notice it says untitled for the document name, and it's going to store them at the root of the repository. Well, we probably don't want that. So we can go ahead and if we click on the ellipsis, we can choose the location where we want to store the files. Go ahead and highlight the folder in which you want that document to be stored. Okay, so you've stored the document in that location. Now we want to rename the document as well. And having them just untitled would probably not make a lot of sense. But if we're going to store it in our folder path, we probably want to make it kind of unique. So if we name it based on the vendor name and vendor number and maybe a date, that would be useful. However, we also have not configured any fields yet so that when we do the lookup, we have the vendor name. So if we want to use the vendor name in our document name, we should configure down below our fields in there. So we'll go ahead and you can get that to come up in 2 ways. I'm going to go ahead and click cancel there. You can click on the configure fields button down below, or you can click on the icon on the toolbar, which allows you to customize your lookup of metadata. So we'll go ahead and configure fields. It tends to want to come up on the wrong screen, so let me bring that over. Let's go ahead and we're going to set our template. And in my case, I've set up for our demo purposes a template called Quick Fields. You'll need to have created this in advance. If it already exists, great. If not, then you will need access to the Laserfish administration console. Go ahead and add your template. And in this template, we have our vendor ID field, a document type field, vendor name, address, and all the values that we're going to pull from that database. Okay, so we can click on that. If you have that all set up, we're good to go. And notice now we have our vendor ID and all these fields that we can fill in with information that we are pulling back from our lookup. How do you create that lookup? Well, if we hit our little token dialog box over here, we don't have a lookup built yet. So in fact, what we should do is go ahead and add our lookup. And we'll click on that customize metadata icon again. Keeps on popping up there. And under our real-time processes option, we want to add a process, and we'll call it field lookup. All right, and this will step us through a little bit of a wizard to choose our source of data. And so what we'll do is we'll configure our source. In our case, I told you we have a database, so we'll just go ahead and use advanced, although you can use a Windows ODBC connection. If you have a direct connection to SQL on that same machine that this QuickFields is, advanced would be fine. But either way, it'll look fairly similar. In this case, I'm going to click through, and again, we're recording this, so if you are getting behind on this one, don't feel like you have to create a database right now to catch up. All right, in this case, I have a Microsoft SQL server that has my table, so I'm going to set that up here. In this case, I will also set up the server name. And I've got a free Microsoft SQL SQL Express edition, so that's great. And the database is called External Tables. Go ahead and do that. Check Windows Authentication and finish. All right, so that's set up. And then we'll go to our next step, which is we will theoretically have a list of data or tables that we can choose from. And I have a database in here. Scroll through that, and it's called Table CDI Demo QuickFields. All right, now that I've chosen that, I'm going to do a lookup, and I need to add some lookup information. Go ahead and use that ID, and the ID in the vendor ID from that table needs to be matched by the barcode number that's read off of the document. So vendor ID 1001 should do a lookup into the database and find that same vendor ID in the database. And then we should be able to, when we find that match, get some results. And those results would be the vendor name, and we should populate the column in our list now. We now have that choice in there. So the field of vendor name will be that. Now I'm going to cancel out of here so that we just go to our next trigger. And basically when the document is processed, that's when this real-time process will run. You could tell it to run manually by pressing a key, or when a field is changed on the QuickField session and you come over to the actual values and change a value, you could tell it to do that. But we're going to do an automatic lookup, so to speak, and that's when we check just the box called when the document is processed. We don't have any options except showing field icons on our item over the far right side, and we'll finish this wizard and click OK. So what will happen is we haven't set it up yet, but over on our template, our vendor ID will be based on our barcode number, and then our vendor name will actually be pulled from, let's see, where is my option for that? Let's double check and make sure I didn't do that. Okay, so we've got our lookup. All right, so we'll go ahead and hit that drop down. I must have called it something different. Well, I'm going to go back to the editor here, and we'll go through that step and actually do what I told you I wasn't going to do. Let's go ahead and do that. We'll click on our process. We'll go back to our results, and our results, we would want to click add. So let's go back here and click add, and we're going to say, okay, so we're going to pull the vendor name, and that value will be the vendor name. So the field over here on this far right side, we see the vendor name field on the template. We're going to fill that field with the value that's pulled back from the database of the vendor name. You can add additional fields. Go ahead and add the address that pulls back from the address field from that column in the database called vendor address. Go ahead and click OK. And we'll continue adding those as appropriate. City, pull from the city column. Click OK. Same with state. In this case, we'll pull the column of the state and zip. Go ahead and choose the zip code. All right, so that's what we're pulling back from the database. We'll go ahead and click OK on that. And that should now populate the lookup. So notice you now have these icons, as we see here, that demonstrate that the information is pulling from a database and filling in these fields in that method. All right, so you can do that kind of lookup, or you could add a different method in page processing, where you click on page processing and you could add the lookup step here and step through a wizard that does the same thing. It gets you the same process. It's just a little bit different. I'm going to go ahead and disable that for the moment because we've added our real-time process there. And it depends. Lookup and real-time process may be in one of the license packs. I'm not exactly sure if it's part of the basic quick fields. It's certainly not as far as I know, not in the basic quick fields. The very inexpensive quick fields, let's put it that way. So if you bought any other package, you probably have the lookup as well. If you have any questions, go ahead and let me know, and I can answer that question. All right, so we've got our page processing set up to read the barcode, and then a real-time process when we do have our barcode to look up that information and fill it in on the template as we see here over on the right side. We should also set a default for our document type. We'll go ahead and choose vendor invoice so that all of our process documents have that document type, and it'll fill in the vendor info and all that. Now that we have this info, we should probably go back and rename our document. Let's go ahead and rename that document so that its default will be the vendor ID number, and then we'll put in the vendor name that's coming from the field. So under fields, we could choose the vendor name. So now, because we have those fields pulling information from a database, they should have a value in them that can be used to name the document. So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to choose the field of vendor name to apply to that document, and then I'll add a space hyphen space again, and I'll use maybe today's date and time just to make it look more unique. All right. If we were filing all these in one folder, then we would want to make sure that they have some way of being unique, because as we know, Laserfiche does not like it when a document is with the same name is stored in the same folder. It'll try and rename it and put a number 2 on the end. All right. So that is our naming convention, our storage path. Let's go ahead and add a storage path that's a little different. I'm going to add a backslash on the path there, and we're going to use the field value of the vendor name to store the documents in that folder path more specifically, not just in the QuickFields webinar folder, but in the vendor name folder underneath that folder. All right, and then we don't have any last page identification or post-processing steps that we need. So the only thing to configure is, notice up at the top, we did not configure the search directory. We'll go ahead and I should have my source location in there. And you can also say, hey, you know what? I always have if you're pulling from Laserfiche, you don't have to specify the file type. If you're scanning, you won't have this option. You'll just scan the documents, and they are going to be TIFF images. But if you're pulling from a folder location, you can put that in here. So with that configured, you should definitely go ahead and now click the Save button. You could click File, Save, or Save As. You've already given the session a name. It'll ask you, okay, what do you want to call this? You called it something else, and I'll go ahead and save that file. You always want to save your session file. So that's the Laserfiche Quickfield session file that you just saved. And now you can go ahead and test and see if it's going to work. So we'll go up and hit the Start Scanning button to run. I don't see any questions in the chat window, so hopefully you are either following along or you're getting this all very well, so that's great. Again, post that message in there if you have questions. At this point, we've got our default document name, document storage location, template assigned, and a lookup configured. And theoretically, we should now be able to see 3 documents, like we saw in our demo, that come through. I need to change that. All right. Okay, and we got a weird result. So the path is being used here, so I'm not sure if that's appropriate. Let's go double check one thing. And give me a moment here, folks. I'm just going to double check my folder path. Okay, got my folder path wrong. All right, so one has to make sure you are pointing to the right path. Let's make sure I use the correct path. Let's cancel that and just hit the drop down and change that path a little bit. And what you can do while you are testing, because we haven't stored this in the repository yet, you can go ahead and delete that scan. The other thing that I've done is in the scan options, you can go down and configure your scan source. And the post-processing step, if you're testing, you might not want to delete the source content. So in this case, I set it up to not do anything to the content so that I can rerun it if I need to test. And I'm going to clear the options down below, and I'll go ahead and hit run and see if I get this. And as we can see, we have our individual documents, all 3 down here, 2-pager. There's our 2 pages. If we go look on our right side, we can see the blue area now, which is not the default, but the actual information that was found and assigned to this document has been set. The template has been set. The document name up at the top has been set, but it's waiting for a vendor name, which is in the fields, but when you store the document, the vendor name token that we see there, that will be replaced with the actual vendor name. And we can see that it pulled all that information into the template for this particular document. You could change the values if you feel that's necessary. If they're incorrect, you could correct them here for quality control purposes. You can then look at the next document and double check that the ID is correct. This one looks like a different vendor. Yep, vendor ID 1002, different information, and same for the third document. And at this point, you have successfully run your session, so go ahead and hit store. Again, like I mentioned, the document name token with vendor name token there on the document name, that will be replaced when you store them in Laserfiche. So let's go ahead and see that. We'll go ahead and hit store. You could actually, what I'm doing is right-clicking on here, but up at the top, there is an icon where you can say store all documents that are sitting in that document revision pane. Go ahead and hit that button, it will prepare and store the documents. And at this point, you can go to your repository and just double check that they are in there. And if we go look at our folder path, we have a second document with a different time, slightly different entry ID in those folders. Because I ran the demo first, we now have our second set of documents in those folders. Okay, great. Good stuff. All right, so you've successfully created your barcode reading session. At this point, technically, if you have a different set of documents to scan, you could then switch this out, create a new template as well, a new session. And why don't we just, in the sake of time, I went a bit too slow on this one. So I don't think we have enough time to build out a Zone OCR method. So let's go look up at the Zone OCR session that I built and show you what that entails. Really not too different from what we did previously, except instead of using a barcode, we used a Zone OCR process to identify and look up information. Okay, so on our first page identification, if you have text, then you could use the Zone OCR process to identify the text. Now, how did we add that to the option? We went over here to our right side and we went to the OmniPage Zone OCR area. And much like the barcode, you simply click on that, which then adds it. You then add a region. I called it ID zone. You can call it anything you want, but you'll need to add that region and then create that rubber band area. They kind of call this, I don't know why they call it rubber banded area. And you can resize that depending on what's the text on the document. Now, I'm using a cover sheet. You could, maybe you don't have a cover sheet. Maybe all your documents have a unique number or a unique word on the top of the page. You could put this zone at that top of the page in order to identify that first page. And what did I do in this case? Well, maybe I'm looking for a specific word, letter, number, or beginning number. So in this case, I actually, in the identification condition, went and said, okay, for that ID zone, if it starts with a 1, or if it contains, the word invoice, whatever that value may be that's unique to identify that first page, go ahead and use that. So I'm going to say starts with, not invoice, but the number 1. All right, so that zone is going to read that and it'll go 1001, and it starts with a 1, so that matches, and therefore it's a first page. Then in page processing, we simply add our OmniPage Zone OCR as well. We can do that. And then I did it slightly differently in this session. So I showed you one way of doing a database lookup by configuring it within the on our page processing and setting it up. You could actually do it a different way, slightly different. I added the lookup from our list of page processing options and added it as a second step within page processing. But again, the Zone OCR set it up in the correct area. You can have multiple zones. So if your page has all the, city, state, address, zip, and all that on the page, you could create individual zones, maybe a second zone for, we'll call this city. And maybe on that page, that city zone is somewhere down here, and you might have to tighten it up a little bit on that document. Imagine there's a document behind there that actually has the city to be read. So that's how you add additional zones within your process. Okay, you don't need them. I'm going to remove that in this case because it really wouldn't work properly. Zone OCR is a OCR process, and you do have choices. So you can select English or any other language available in the dropdown. Usually it's English. You have a optimization style over there. You have 3 choices. Balanced is probably your best starting point. If you're not getting accurate reading, maybe change it up to accuracy, although that may slow it down a very slight amount per page. We're talking like 1 or 2 milliseconds per page, so it really doesn't add up that much. But if you're processing tens of thousands of documents, eventually add up to something, but really we're not concerned about that usually. Your orientation at this point is straight horizontal, so we'll leave it at 0 degrees. And you can even test the process down below or right-click up at the top left and test the process. And let's see what it reads. Down below, it read the vendor number value of 1001. Perfect. And as we can see, it does a lookup. And let's take a look at the lookup configuration. And how did we do that? So it's a little different than the previous explanation. We added the lookup process and said, hey, go look for the vendor ID number based on the vendor number read from the previous Zone OCR step. All right, so there's we call that vendor number, so vendor pound sign. So our lookup, if you want to create that again, let me add it again. Go look in the, well, it's already in my list. Okay, guess I gotta, let's remove that and add from our database. We're going to look up vendor ID based on the lookup from the Zone OCR vendor number area. So it should read the number and use that to look up in the vendor ID column in the database. And based on that, we can go back to, up on our cover sheet, up here, we can go and say, choose the lookup. So that lookup process gives us the results from that database. So that's what I did here. So instead of using those that database real-time process, I did a lookup to do that. So it's slightly different, but it's the same result. That lookup will do a lookup against the vendor ID and pull back all that information, which I filled out in the fields. And I'm still using the fields or the lookup. I could actually use the field token. So on our fields, so I'll use the vendor name field there, and we'll switch that out from being a lookup to our field of vendor ID. And therefore, we now have a document that's going to be named and saved in the same place. So now we can save our session. I always hit that save button, and then I'll just run it to test. So let's go ahead and delete these items. Again, quick fields, if the documents are not stored yet, they are here in quick fields in the session. So in fact, if you hit the session save button up there, you're saving those scanned images, those TIFF images, in the quick field session at the very moment you're doing that, which is pretty cool. It takes up a little space, and then maybe you'll have to come back in later and send them into the repository. I call this purgatory. They're not in Laserfish Heaven yet, but go ahead and we'll go ahead, just for processing and testing, go ahead and delete that. We'll go ahead and run our start scanning. All right. And it has identified our documents. It hasn't named them yet, but if we go look at the field values, that looks correct for this one, 1001. We'll click on document number 2. 1002 is the vendor ID, and it pulled back all the unique info. And as soon as we store the document, it will then be stored in there as appropriate. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm just highlighting the entire item, and that will store the documents in my folder structure, which I've created a slightly different structure. Let's say, I think I did. I'll go ahead and hit refresh on my screen there. Actually, it just stores them in the same place, naming them slightly different. So we can see here's our last storage with a slightly higher entry ID than all the previous stored entries. All right. Good stuff. And that is the end of our build along. We'll go ahead and finish out here, conclude our training. And here we go. So thank you so much for following along here. We will go ahead and conclude some resources for using quick fields. I highly recommend that you use Laserfish's support site. They have all kinds of information about how to actually configure QuickFields and all the modules within it. If you're stuck on a particular method of creating QuickFields sessions, but you already understand all the basics of how to do that, there is a forum. They call it Answers, and that is listed here. And there's also solutions that have been built out that give examples, much like we might have done a build out like we did here today. They have written solution exchange articles, and that's off the main Laserfish website. So that's great. If you have any questions, my name is Kyle, so you can send an email to kyle@citiesdigital.com. If you want to set up a training session or schedule consulting to help build out some QuickField sessions with us directly, our consulting staff is available. Just send an email to consulting@citiesdigital.com. And if you have support or sales questions, you can reach those departments with the sales or support@citiesdigital.com addresses as well. Again, thank you so much for your attendance. We here at CDI appreciate your attendance and your attention during this training session. Look forward to seeing you at the next training session, and have a great paperless day.